direct a noble cause, guide our leaders aright, help our youth the truth to know, in love and honesty to grow, and living just and true. Great lofty heights attain, to build a nation where peace and justice shall reign. You may be seated. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a few months ago when we were privileged to host this gathering, my parting words to you were that taxation is a key ingredient in the social contract between citizens and the economy, and that how taxes are raised and spent can determine a government's very legitimacy.
As a reminder, the expectations of the Federal Inland Revenue Service are to ensure that all eligible taxpayers are registered, that their taxes are assessed and collected promptly and accurately, and that taxpayers are educated on their rights and obligations under the tax laws. For our citizens, the establishment of the FIRS means that they can expect a more efficient and more effective system that is both fair and transparent. Citizens can also expect to be educated on their rights and obligations and to be treated with professionalism and respect by the FIRS officials. Additionally, citizens can also expect that their tax contributions will be used to fund critical public services and infrastructure development in our beautiful country.
Today's event can be seen as presenting a scorecard, the FIRS impacting the Nigerian economy with the aim of rendering an account of stewardship in the last 2 years. We will be highlighting areas of success and identifying areas for further improvement and collaboration. We hope to concentrate on the broad areas of improving tax compliance and leveraging technology for efficient revenue collection.
We believe that the FIRS and the G2C, this engagement, will be excellent opportunity for further constructive conversations about the future of tax administration in this country. We hope that the discussion here today will be as insightful and productive as our previous one. And we look forward to hearing from our distinguished panelists as well as participants.
Recording in progress.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mansura Alioluwafuyu.
And my name is Oladele Ogunlano. Thank you for being here with us. At this time, I'd like to invite the convener for his speech, Mr. Bode Bore, Senior Special Assistant, Political Matters to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Distance and lack of participation of the citizens in governance leaves a few thoughts. One of them is the feeling of irrelevance. Government to citizens interface G2C since 2020 has succeeded in bringing the consciousness of the Nigerian people to the table of conversation with the government. We all do more and better when we sit on a table for conversation and deliberate on matters of Nigeria. Today, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, FIRS, under its chairman, Muhammadu Nami, who is not here right now, and his team, having worked hard enough for the purpose of national interest, brings its report of stewardship to the public view for the Nigerian people. They unfold today how the FIRS impacted the Nigerian economy in recent years. The Nigerian people are far more interested in participation by paying their taxes if they are assured of accountability and judicious use of taxes. The G2C team will continue to create that platform that brings the government and the Nigerian citizens together for deliberations towards a better and more dignified Nigeria for all around the world. After all, isn't that what governance means in the first place? I am Bode Olubore. I speak for the Nigerian people. I thank you all for listening. Let the deliberations continue. Thank you.
Thank you once again. Thank you all very much once again for being here. You'd agree with me that we've had a good start. And before we go into the thick of things, I would like to make recognition to some of our distinguished guests here. But before that, everyone is warmly welcome. Thank you for coming. I'd like to recognize the presence of Mr. Abdulhamid, MT, who is the state coordinator of the FCT, Kogi, and Nasarawa. Thank you for coming. Thank you, sir. Also, I'd like to recognize the presence of Hajia Nana Aisha Obemegie, pardon my pronunciation, who is the JTB secretary. It's a pleasure to have you, ma'am. Thank you. I'd also like to recognize the presence of Manasseh Ortauga, the Deputy Director, Taxpayer Service. It's a pleasure to have you here. Additionally, may I also recognize the presence of Mr. Husseini Ibrahim, who is the SA on ICT to the Executive Chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Service. It's our pleasure to have you. Let's also warmly welcome and recognize Johannes Wojola, the SA on Media and Communication to the Executive Chairman of the FIRS. Thank you for coming. I would go on to also recognize Mrs. Hajara Uniyogi, the Director of Tax Appeal Tribunal. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to have you. And last but not the least, as we also continue and move on, may I recognize the presence of Mr. Amade John, the Director, Medium Tax Department. Thank you all once again for coming. We'll be watching a very short clip of what FIRS has done so far. The essence of this interface, of this engagement, is to discuss with the people, to show the people how much of work FIRS is doing, what its mandates are, and how well they're delivering on that mandate. So we're watching a very short clip to see how far FIRS has come, especially with the new innovations and interesting things that they have for us. So please bear with us. It'll be showing very soon. Thank you.
I'll start by reminding ourselves what the four cardinal goals are. The first is to make sure that we make FIRS an institution that is focused on serving customers very well, so that we help them in the course of our work to be able to file their returns seamlessly, get our attention as and when it is required. Number two is to make FIRS an institution with adequate data. The data is not just there for FIRS alone, but to aid even government for purpose of planning generally. Number three is to ensure that we make FIRS an institution that take relationship with other stakeholders seriously. Through that relationship, we are able to collaborate with agencies that are not within even the ministry that supervises us, for us to be able to serve our taxpayers better. And the most important one is to rebuild FIRS institution. Having given that background, the impact that has had or is still having on our processes, our performance is enormous. You recall what we did last year, that in 2021, January to December, we recorded tax collection of about 6.4 trillion naira. And out of this 6.4, 31%, only 31% came from oil and gas. The non-oil related tax collection was 69%. So it's enormously affecting the reforms, the goals that we set for us are actually impacting positively in our business and the thing we do at FRS.
When this current administration came on board under our able chairman, Muhammad Onemi, FRS was in some kind of disarray, so to say. But he came up with 4 cardinal objectives that he wanted to achieve. And thus far, he has achieved those objectives. So one of them, of course, is rebuilding the institutional framework of the service. What this means is that hitherto, we didn't even have a board in the FRS. Upon coming of this current administration, we now have a board, of the service. Functions were clearly defined, and of course, departments were, properly delineated. Everybody, all the functions were clearly defined. Offices were segmented because we have threshold for our offices. We categorized them into what we call the large taxpayers offices, the medium tax offices, micro and small. The second one, of course, is collaboration with our various stakeholders, because we have noticed that over time, FRS is the responsibility of all to come together to get the necessary revenues for government, and we can't do it alone. So we have our own critical stakeholders, prominent amongst the Corporate Affairs Commission. We have the Joint Tax Board, the NFIU, the CBN, the Ministry of Finance, and all that. They are our critical stakeholders in the service. So the third cardinal principle or objective of the EC, of the Executive Chairman, is to make FRS, a customer-centric organization. You see, in all our field offices, and we have a lot of them, across the country, we have what we call the help desk in each office, where customers' complaints and questions are being attended to. So there's a help desk, at every point in the office. And we have our helplines where you can place the call and your issues will be addressed. We also went further to create what we call the contact center, where taxpayers from the comfort of their homes and offices can place a call in different languages. We have it in Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, French, English, and still counting, where their issues can be addressed. So the last but not the least, of course, is to make FRS a data-centric organization as well too. You see, data, they say, is the oil of the future, because we now notice that without data we can't really do much. So we even created a dedicated department called the Data Mining Department, where we plug into so many sources of information about our taxpayers.
The tripod of taxation, we always go back to it. The tax policy work, like I mentioned, belong to the Federal Ministry of Finance under the Honorable Minister of Finance. Legislation is in the remit of the National Assembly, of course with the President assenting to bills that have been passed. That's what our Constitution provides for. And so therefore the primary role for legislation is with the National Assembly. However, when it comes to tax laws, the National Assembly also doesn't work in isolation. It works with all relevant stakeholders. First of all, beginning with the policy of government, which is going to be the source of the laws, and then inputs from the Minister of Finance, input from tax practitioners, from businesses, input from civil society organizations, and very importantly, input from the Federal Revenue Service, who is responsible for administering those laws. And so our role, therefore, has been, number one, to provide feedback to government, because for every legislation, no legislation is perfect. And so when you have a legislation and you put it into operation, and then you see how it is performing, and you listen to the complaints of taxpayers, you must provide that feedback, so that if there's any need to make an amendment or to tweak the law, that feedback comes in. It's like a loop in itself. Number two is also the fact that FRS often represent Nigeria on the international tax community. And so we see what is happening in other jurisdictions, what kind of legislation that they are putting in place to make administration easier and simpler and more effective. So again, we are able to provide advice, to the minister, to the National Assembly, and say, oh, this is what is happening in the international tax space. For example, the issue of taxation of digitalized economy. We have had to advise government and the National Assembly, and they saw what we brought and they agreed, and that was why we have the significant economic presence legislation in our income tax law. So, but in the whole, our role is to provide response, information, data, and also advise the National Assembly as to legislation, and then of course we engage with other stakeholders in the process. So our role is that of being a sort of an enabler and a support, knowing that the primary role resides with the National Assembly.
So the Digital Transformation Program seeks to overhaul the FIRS systems, processes, and procedures by introducing and implementing new and emerging technologies to coincide or to be able to deal with the digital economy. By digital economy, businesses are going digital in offering their goods and services. And like they say, the tax authority will always move with the money. So it's only natural for us to also begin to rejig our strategies so as to be able to fulfill our obligation for these businesses that have gone digital. The reform is also hinged on the 4 cardinal points of the current management. First, which is to rebuild the organization. By rebuilding the organization, we implemented a comprehensive framework for performance management. Then the second cardinal point is build a customer-centric organization. Now, as you may agree with me, the name you call a person is the way you behave to the person. And the trend now is seeing our taxpayers as our customers. By seeing them as our customers, we're able to look at what's the same, a typical customer service approach to dealing with your customers is what we're beginning to adopt. Then the next of the cardinal goals is data-centric organization. I think it's Glo or one of the telcos that has a slogan to say data is life, or I think it's Airtel really, that has data is life. So with that, you can then imagine why we say we want to be a data-centric organization. By being a data-centric organization, you're actually knowing your customer. Over time, you begin to build information on the customer that, if you look at what the banks do, like KYC, you want to know what's happening to your customer at every point in time. Okay, first, the tax
Not to put them,
is
you fold them. You know what they call folds?
administration
Okay?
system
Don't be pushing them. This is how we do it.
manages the end-to-end life cycle of a taxpayer, as well as the tax authority in terms of accountability. For you to use the Tax Pro Max, you have to first register. And for you to register, you need to download the update form and then complete it and take it to the nearest tax office, whichever tax office that's within your threshold. If you're a small taxpayer, if you're a micro taxpayer, if you're a medium taxpayer, if you're a large taxpayer. So you take it to your nearest tax office, depending on what your business turnover is.
As we all know, data is the new gold. Data is the new oil. The more data you have, the more effective that we can be. So, and you will also see that these giant companies, like you have Google, you have Facebook, you have others like Amazon, and some of the top tech companies. I would like to zero in on Google and Facebook. You wonder, what are these guys really selling? It is data. They make so much money from data that they are now, each of those companies I mentioned is worth over $1 trillion. They started from zero, now they are $1 trillion using data. They are data-centric companies, and they have shown us what is possible, what is doable when you make effective use of data. So in the Federal Inland Revenue Service, we have also started on our journey of making FIRS a data-centric organization. And the way we are going about this is we are getting data from different sources, both external and internal sources, in order to give a 360 degrees view of the tax payers. And you know, our major focus is on the corporates, but we also, our jurisdiction also extends to some specific type of individuals, like the non-resident individuals who are, some are just passing by. There are a lot of non-resident individuals who have come to Nigeria to do business, maybe for consultancy, to carry out one function or the other, and they earn huge amounts of money.
The unique selling point of FRS staff, apart from the fact that we're quite a large number of staff, the most interesting aspect of it is that our staff are very, very well trained, highly qualified, and very motivated people. We have staff who are acknowledged experts locally and internationally in taxation and even in ICT and other areas too. Those are two very key things, I think, that we have a large number of staff and we have very qualified, motivated staff. They can stand anywhere and compare with their peers as experts in whatever fields or operations we're talking about. And I'm very proud of the FIRS staff, and I'm sure Nigeria has every reason to be proud of them too.
The next award is in Public Service Person of the Year. And this will go to the Chairman, Federal Inland Revenue Service, Mr. Mohammed Nabi.
Leadership Award 2022, Leadership Public Service Person of the Year 2022, Mohammed Maman Nabi, for his bold and unprecedented reform of the Nigeria's tax administration, including the deployment of technology, data, and strategic intelligence, leading to the highest ever tax revenue collection of 6.405 trillion naira in a year. Mohammed Maman Nabi is the Leadership Public Service Person of the Year.
This is an award of 11,000 people that are working with families. So we all feel great, we feel honored for the first time in the history of our country. FIRS is being recognized as a public service institution. I wouldn't want to call it public servant. So it makes us feel honored, more indebted to us. When we came on board as a team, we made a service which has consistently worked between 5.2 trillion for 9 years. So the impact of the funds that we have made, we moved from that, now we say that 5.2 to 6.4 trillion in year 2020. And what has happened in 2022, we have a jump from that same figure to 3.7 trillion. Now there's transformed 6.4 in 2021 to 10.1 trillion.
So all these taxes are paid because there is a social contract between the government and the citizens that come together to form a nation. So this social contract requires that the citizens pay for running the government, and the government then provides certain services that only the government can provide. And in some cases, it also provides services that others can provide, but the government has decided that they are too important to be left to the market. So for example, we all need common defense. So we need one military for Nigeria, and it has to be funded. Secondly, we need a good environment with clean air. And that is a pure public good. If I enjoy clean air, or I enjoy the services of the military giving me defense, it doesn't stop any other Nigerian from enjoying that. And that is why it has to be done by the government, because it is a public good. If you allow it to the private sector, it cannot work. So that is why government collects taxes in order to be able to provide all these services. But importantly, in our lives, we also do businesses. So we need to be sure that there is law and order, and our property rights will be protected by the judiciary. Again, the judiciary is another pure public good. You cannot have a private judiciary. It can be only run by government, but it has to be funded, because the staff of the judiciary have to be paid. So that is why we all pay taxes, so that we get these services that we need in order to run our businesses and have a good life. And that is the social contract that we have between the citizens. We elect our public officers, who then ensure the public servants, like the staff of FIRS, are held accountable for the jobs that we've been given to do.
In the housing sector, directly in the Ministry of Works, we are building houses in 35 states. So we have 35 construction centers where we are employing contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, laborers, artisans, skilled and unskilled labor, directly. Through our parastatals like the Federal Housing Authority and the Federal Mortgage Bank, Federal Housing Authority is going to deliver, I think, about 6,000 housing units nationwide this year. Federal Mortgage Bank is already commissioning close to 7,000 housing units in different parts of Nigeria. We have issued certificates of occupancy to over 6,700 people since I've been here. Some of those certificates have started coming back in terms of governors or president's consent. I've completed 4 new federal secretariats which the president will commission soon in Nasarawa, in Bayelsa, in Oka, in Anambra, and in Zamfara State. We are progressing on Ikiti and Osun, and we are about to start a few ones. These are fallouts of the creation of states program. But beyond that, we are maintaining 28 existing federal secretariats. We've done a renovation and rehabilitation of them. We've issued facility management and maintenance contracts that were not there before. So we've employed 28 different companies. First of all, each of those companies have employed at least 40 people to do facility management and maintenance, from electricians to plumbers to security men to gardeners to cleaners and so on and so forth. Those jobs were not there in 2015 when Buhari came. On the road side, well, we have over 13,000 kilometers of road under contract for rehabilitation, reconstruction, and so on, nationwide. This is captured in over 1,000 contracts that we are managing. We have, I think, 169 laboratories nationwide, because contrary to what people, some of the things people don't know, everything that goes into constructing a road must pass through a laboratory. You can't just put any sand, you can't put any water, you can't put any type of cement, you can't put any type of diesel, you can't put any type of asphalt. Asphalt must be delivered at a particular temperature throughout when it's used. So we have lab technicians nationwide operating. We have employed supervision consultants who supervise. Those are jobs who are benefiting from this. So through infrastructure, actually, we are just redistributing wealth in the economy. We have started the birth of a new economy that was not there when I took office. The economy of...
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. And I'd like to recognize in our midst the following people. I'd like to recognize Alhaji Kabir Abba, Coordinating Director, General Tax Operations Group. Thank you for coming, sir. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Ephraim Okejiri, Director, FIRS. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Additionally, I would like to recognize the presence of the different representatives from various organizations that we have here. In no particular order, the representatives from the NTA, the Nigerian Television Authority, it's our pleasure to have you. The representatives from Cool Wazobia and Info FM, thank you for coming. Those from the Voice of Nigeria, it's our pleasure to have you here. The representatives from Beat FM, thank you. Also like to recognize the representatives from the African News and TV. Thank you very much for coming. May I also humbly recognize, the recognition of the representatives from NIMC, those from Sterling Bank, TED Fund, EFCC, UBEC. Thank you all for coming. I'd also like to recognize the presence of the representatives from the presidency. It's our pleasure to have you here. May we also put our hands together for those who have come from the Chartered Institute of Taxation. It's our pleasure to have you here. Last but not the least, the representatives of COREN, as well as the Nigerian Bar Association. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much, and very quickly we will go into the panel session, and I would invite three distinguished persons to join me on stage to look very quickly at our preference area for this section, which is about improving tax compliance rates. And please join me as I welcome Alhaji Kabiru Abba. I'd also like to welcome Mrs. Ruth Arokoyo, Director, Office of the Special Tax Operations Group. May I invite Mr. Lucky Obodoeke to please join us on stage. This is also a good time to ask that if you have any questions in the course of listening, please indicate, and one of our ushers will give you a sheet of paper so you can write them down, and then we'll be able to ask your questions on this platform. Thank you very much. Right, going quickly into that, sir, I would like to start off with you and ask that you give us an overview of the current tax compliance rates in addition to what FIRS performance has been in the last 2 years.
Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to all of us. Sorry, this afternoon. You see, FIRS core mandate has remained to assess, collect, and account for revenues on behalf of the federal government of Nigeria. That has been our core mandate. And so far, so good. We can say in the last 2 years that we have done impressively well in that regard. And this we can see
Recording
from
in progress.
our performances in the last 2 years. In 2021, we're given a target of about 5.9 trillion naira. And we collected 6.4 trillion naira, which represents about 109% for the various tax types, starting from the company's income tax, value-added tax, education tax, and all that. Coming down to 2022, with a target of 10.4 trillion naira, meaning to say the target was almost doubled from 2001 to 2002, because 2001 was 5.9, 2002, 10.4, and we collected 10.1 trillion naira. But what is more pleasing is the fact that if you see the ratios of the targets, when you compare the oil to the non-oil revenues, we collected over 69% of non-oil revenues compared to the oil, which of course the story was not like that in the past few years. Even in the last collection that we accounted for 2022, non-oil revenues stood at 60% compared to the 40% on the oil revenues. You see, all these things did not just happen by fluke. It was clearly designed, and strategic measures were taken to achieve these great figures that I'm rolling out this afternoon. When this current administration came on board under our able chairman, Muhammad Unemi, you can, from the display before the program started, he came up with 4 cardinal goals that he wants to achieve. And I can say proudly that that has actually assisted us in rolling out these figures. Because what we started with was sensitization and enlightenment. Because at that time, not all Nigerians or tax-paying public even know the importance of paying taxes. So we now started by sensitizing the public. We now strengthened what we call our taxpayer services department to begin to sensitize through the print and the medias and different forums. So Nigerians began to be aware of the fact that they need to pay their taxes. Another important thing is the support that we got specifically from the National Assembly and the Ministry of Finance and our critical stakeholders as well. FRS operates what we call a self-assessment regime. That is the accounts to the Revenue Authority. So over time, we now discovered that most of them, there hasn't been full disclosure of their financial dealings. So that was why the data mining department was created. And in every FRS gathering, you get to hear us say data mining, because that has been the key to us, because we've plugged into so many sources. Corporate Affairs Commission happens to be the agency saddled with the responsibility of registering, companies in the country. We now keyed in with them, the Nigerian Customs Service and all that. So all these things together has actually helped us to change these figures. And I can assure you, it's just the beginning. We have just started. And I can proudly also say that FRS has been the one contributing the larger percentage of what is being shared at the Federal Accounts and Allocation Committee. That's the fact. Because we contribute over 60% of what is being shared, and this goes to the 3 tiers of government in the country. So far so good. Compliance level has increased now.
We can safely say that minimum of what has been collected, 60%, was from FIRS. Yeah. And so we're hopeful that by the time we move into another era, which we will speak about later on, taking advantage of technology and otherwise, we would probably be looking close to like 80 or more. Okay, well, we'll take you up on that. I tried to be careful by saying 80, but now you're saying more, so that is exciting. Mrs. Arokoyo, looking at the targets versus the actuals that we have, what would you honestly say would be the reason for non-compliance? And what specific measures are being taken to broaden the tax base, so that we can improve on tax administration?
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. In recent years, the FRS has taken lots and lots of initiative to ensure that tax compliance is improved and that the tax base is broadened. One of the key things that FRS did was the deployment of technology. Technology has helped us to get more taxpayers into the tax net. We have also collaborated with third parties, with some organizations, like the CAC. Now, any company that is newly registered, immediately they register from CAC, they are given a
taxpayer identification number. And that is passed onto the FRS for us to follow up. That has also helped. Again, through the Finance Act, now the threshold for payment of taxes is 25 million. That means companies that have turnover less than 25 million are just to file. They will not pay taxes if they file on time. This has encouraged compliance, because hitherto some companies who feel that they are not doing much, so they don't need to come into the tax net, are now encouraged to come out, because they know all what the law demands of them now is to come and file and show their presence. And this is an encouragement to growing the small-scale industries in Nigeria, because we allow them, the law allows them to be using their profits to continue to expand their businesses, so that in future, when they now, the turnover now exceeds 25 million, they can now start filing. Then from 2020 to 2022, the FRS has given waivers. They have given extension of filing. For example, in 2020, because of COVID, there was a waiver of filing up to December, and late returns penalty was not collected. The same thing in 2021 and 2022. In 2022, companies that had assessments from audits and from administrative assessments were encouraged to come forward and make payment of the principal tax. The interest on late payment was waived. These are some of the efforts that has been made to encourage compliance. Then the yearly Finance Act, where the tax reform is being carried out, there's a lot of changes that have been made to our laws to ensure that the law is more friendly to the taxpayers so that they can comply willingly. This is taking place on a yearly basis. And before the Finance Act is passed, stakeholders contribute. Whatever they feel is looked into, the committee look into their concerns, and these are taken into consideration. And I can tell you that the laws we are operating in Nigeria is what is being operated globally. So that has helped in compliance, and all these efforts are what has helped us to increase revenue generation. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. So what would you say that our targets are pretty much close to what we are actually, actual performance, or we're very kind on ourselves with our targets so that we can exceed in terms of performance, or, I just want us to have some clarity on that. The targets vis-a-vis the actuals, are we doing so well?
Thank you. Presently, the targets that the federal government is giving us, we are doing well. But I know that going forward, we will do more, because a lot is being put in place. For example, there's an updated VAT filing that the service has just deployed, and sensitization is ongoing to stakeholders to know how to use it. All this one will definitely lead to increased revenue collection. But presently, we are doing well on our targets, and if the target is increased, I know that we will still make it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, because even after this event, your target will definitely be increased. Mr. Lucky, I want to ask you about something that might be of interest to a lot more of us in terms of business persons who are excited about new opportunities, what else we can do. I would like you to tell us about your incentives, the special tax operations, which is your turf. What kind of incentives, what do we look out for? What can excite us to even go into different areas at this time?
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying that the grant of incentives is a deliberate policy of every government worldwide. And there are basic reasons for granting of incentives. These reasons are sometimes generic to grow the economy, to foster industrial development, to get forex inflows, for transfer of technology, sometimes to even bring development to some underserved areas in the country. So incentives are given because there are targeted objectives by government. There are some generic incentives which are for everybody. But if you are not bringing anything to the table at the end of the day, it is not equitable that you expect to enjoy incentives. So government grants incentives, tax incentives, with the objective that at the end of the day, there will also be commensurate returns to government. So there are several classes of incentives that we have in the country, especially in our tax laws. I will speak on the incentives that are administered by the Federal Inland Revenue Service because of the kind of federalism we operate. There are tax incentives at the state level and even at the local government level. But at the federal level, all the incentives that we administer, one, are products of policy from government and they are in our laws. There are some of them that are very prominent. The pioneer incentive, my mind goes to look at, oh, this is a refinery located in a free zone. I think in the recent times, the greatest number of new major investments into the country are heading in the direction of the free zones. There are many of them. And FRS is also a key player in the free zone scheme because the free zones are actually enjoying tax incentives, and that is where FRS is involved. So let us also, as investors, look at specific businesses that are also approved for the free zones. So for those who are prospective investors that are here, entities, businesses that falls into that criteria, you can go into it. Of course, the primary supervisors, the Export Processing Zone Authority and the Oil and Gas Free Zone Authority are there. But FRS is also very, very, very key and also collaborating actively with these operators. Permit me to also report, since we are doing a FRS report card, that under the current administration in FRS, a tax incentives management department was created, and that department handles and liaises with all entities that are enjoying incentives, including the ones I have mentioned. There are many of them. If you go to section 23 of the company income tax, you have a whole lot of incentives, entities that are exempted from paying tax. They are all there. These we are doing to ensure that those who qualify for these incentives enjoy it, because come to think of it, what are these incentives meant for? Especially the small entities that enjoy them. There are things and services that they provide which augment and complement what government is doing. For example, the NGOs that do free health checks, they are complementing what our hospital system are doing. The religious organizations who are helping us with our religious life to shape the morality of society is helping us to moderate crime and banditry and all kinds of vices in our system. So the FRS is active in the tax incentive arena. We also have incentives relating to exports. I think I need to state that most of the incentives that we have, there are primary institutions of government that drives them on the front. But the tax aspect of it majorly resides with FRS. And we work collaboratively and systematically to ensure that the objectives of government in granting these incentives are attained without giving room for abuse and leakages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just wondering, maybe for the purposes of some of our viewers that might just need that extra bit of information about when you talk about a free trade zone, if you can just briefly explain to us what that concept is about and how the advantage of the tax incentive to people that operate in that free trade zone.
Thank you very much. In the late 80s, we, as a country, were going through very severe economic depression, and the then government in power under General Babangida brought out structural adjustment program. In that policy of structural adjustment program, several initiatives came on board. One of them is this free trade zone. And what is the essence of the free trade zone? It is to bring in your money in establishing a business in a geographically carved out area where the law treats you as if you are operating in a country separate from Nigeria. The Nigerian side, we call it the custom territory, while the free zone, which is meant to produce, export, and generate forex for the country. The incentives that were enshrined in the rules, in the laws, is one, these import requirements, documentations is relaxed. Free entry and free exit. You are free to repatriate your profits. You are free to exit at any time. And they were insulated from domestic legislations and laws. That was done to ensure that they don't suffer excessive bureaucratic, interferences, and that their businesses run smoothly. They were also established for purposes of generating employment and bringing technology. So they have worked very well. And in recent times, there has been a boom in the number of enterprises or companies that have established in the free zone. I just gave the example of Dangote Refinery yesterday. The fertilizer plant is there. The Lekki free zone, Lagos free zone, there are many of them. And if we look at areas where we're having big industrial development now, they are majorly in the direction of the free zone. So for those who are interested, especially foreign investors, please bring in your forex, establish and enjoy the tax incentives that are associated with the free zones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm staying on this for a bit because would you say that this would drive people towards the free trade zone, essentially because we know that it's a challenge in getting compliance? Do you see this driving people to actually doing business in the free trade zone? How does this then affect our targets and our collections?
Let me state that the collections the figures that have been read out today are exclusive of the free zones. So in terms of targeting and others, the free zones are not in the burner in targeting for our collections. However, there are taxes to be collected from the free zones. So it is not a loss-loss situation. Actually, the country is not losing by granting those tax incentives because they're exempted from paying income tax, paying VAT, they're exempted from paying several taxes. But the country is not losing. We're not losing because, one, what was the primary motive of establishing those zones? To create employment, to generate forex, to ensure that there is activity. And like we do say, the free zone, the entities in the free zone are also different from the investors. And those who work in the free zones, they also pay in the states where they are located. So it's not a complete loss situation. And we also know that there are businesses outside the free zones that comes to do businesses there as contractors, as suppliers, and there are incidental taxes, withholding tax and VAT that may also come along with it. So in terms of compliance, the FIRS has entered into an MOU with the authority of the free zones, the oil and gas free zone and Nigerian processing zone, on how to ensure smooth tax administration where applicable and where necessary in those zones. So it's not that it is a free-for-all completely. Thank you.
It's easy to just apply and quickly go to the free trade zone now, so that it gets lighter. The tax burden on the company gets lighter.
Yes, lighter, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Alhaji Abba, I'm going to come back to you. Yes. I'm coming back to you now just to find out if there are success stories from the COVID experience, the intervention of FIRS. What was there an intervention of FIRS during the COVID era, and has it been removed?
Thank you very much. You see, at the end of it, or after the COVID period, we now found out that it's one of the best things that has happened to the FIRS. Because prior to the COVID period, we usually have issues with compliance. Of course, when the whole world was shut down during the COVID period, we now had to devise means. And that was around the time that our in-house built Tax Pro Max came on board. So what we now did was to now leverage on that technology to make it easy for taxpayers. Because as we speak now, even from the COVID to this period, you can actually do your tax businesses from the comfort of your homes and offices. Because you can actually register E, you can file your returns E, generate your receipts, and even make payments E. You can even print out your tax clearance certificate E as we speak. And most agencies and, of government can even verify. We have what we call the ETCC portal. You can verify that. So during the COVID period, we did not really suffer much in terms of our collection. Everything was still seamless because of that thing that we had as at that time. So compliance actually, even increased as at that time. You see, there is something with the payment of taxes. We have what we call compliance levels. Like I stated earlier, starting from the self-assessment regime that I talked about, where you are allowed to, that's the first compliance level. Because when we sensitize you, we expect you to come and file and make your payments. If you don't, there's another level, which is the audit, compliance level, where we now risk profile our taxpayers, and if you found wanting or maybe file what is otherwise of what you expected to do, we subject you to some form of audit. And of course, you'll find some very difficult and recalcitrant taxpayers, which we now, push to enforcement. We even have the powers to place liens on their accounts. And you can see from the figures, from 2001 to 2002, we have doubled collection. Okay. As I speak, beginning of this year, we even appointed what we call agents of VAT collection. We've incorporated all the money deposit banks in the country and some of the telecommunication companies to collect VAT on our behalf, which is a kind of tax that is paid on a monthly basis. We collected over 2 trillion naira last year in that, even before this. And we're now automating the VAT sector as we speak. So God forbid if COVID should come back or some other things, I can proudly say will be covered, because all these things will now be done E. And if you're a vendor to maybe say empty or any of the money deposit banks, we have now appointed them to be our agents. We've automated the VAT sector, starting with the oil and gas, the hospitality industry, and it's still counting. So by the end of it all, if we deploy the technology that we are, that it's in the pipeline now, I can assure you all these monies will just be coming in seamlessly. So COVID, as at that time, because we know businesses were not really flourishing, we even had to go an extra mile to even waive what we call penalty and interest, for for the tax-paying public so as to, to find it easy. So they do their businesses, they pay. We now waived penalties and interest for them and all that. And don't forget this COVID period was, I think, around 2020 or so. Even as at that time, FRS recorded 98% of its collection targets, even as at that period.
90% of collection targets, so we should also not only say well done to FIRS, doesn't that also mean that people are actually ready to pay taxes? So, I mean, it's also an indication that people actually do want to pay taxes, but the convenience that FIRS has put in it has now helped to make everyone comfortable.
Exactly.
Okay, so one last quick one, and I don't know who's going to answer this, but I just want to throw it out there that would you say that FIRS has contributed, or how well has FIRS contributed to taking us off, or the process of getting off the reliance on oil revenue?
Yes. You see, if you take 5 years back, non-oil revenues contribute just maybe 20–30% to this narrative started changing about 3–4 years ago, where we now contribute up to 65% of the non-oil revenue, because the potentials are there. But what turned out to be our magic was this development of technology that we have put in place. The potentials are there. Even the 10 trillion naira, I think we can even do double of that this year.
20 trillion, okay.
And you see, people are now beginning to be aware, and they see taxpayers' money working for them. Because prior to this time, if you go to some of our maybe rural areas and states, they tell you, why do I have to pay the taxes? But they now see taxpayers' money working. Because this money is when they've been shared at the Federal Accounts and Allocations Committee to the 3 tiers of government. In fact, that is what most of the states even rely to pay salaries, to provide infrastructure, critical ones for that matter. You can see bridges, you can see roads, you can see hospitals. All these are taxpayers' money. So that confidence is there now. Yes.
Great, thank you very much. You touched on it. Technology, our second segment would be looking in that area. And lady and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for being a part of this. However, before you go, do we have any questions? Do we have any questions before I release them? Questions going? Questions going? Oh, we have quite a number of questions, apparently.
Recording in progress.
Immediately after this session, before we go into the second session, we would have a quick 10-minute presentation. Is this all we have? Okay, so I'll take the 2 questions. They're not specific. Okay, so one says, as FIRS is trying to increase tax compliance in Nigeria, what are the efforts being put in place to include the informal sector that has large number of operators in the country? This is from Tolulokwe Oludayo, News Portal Africa. Right, go ahead, sir.
The informal sector is very large, and FIRS is aware of this. Indeed, every tax administration worldwide is aware of the significance of the informal sector. In FIRS, the issue of the informal sector has been addressed in about 2 ways. First is through legislation. The threshold of 25 million for filing and for payment was to address the challenges of the informal sector, because they are majorly on the small scale. And I think the current administration, the leadership of the current administration, is very sympathetic to those at the lower level of the economic echelon and want to encourage small businesses to grow. So the issue of a threshold of 25 million came. That is a relief.
Okay.
Secondly, FIRS has an obligation to at least have data on the population of small businesses. where they are, what they do, how much they make. So we have satellite offices that have now been created in smaller cities so that tax affairs of these small entities can go there. I think about 10 years ago, Lagos State, for example, deployed these small offices that like cabins into markets so that women and traders don't have to even leave the confines of the market to render their tax obligation. That model worked, and FRS is implementing something similar. We have satellite offices that are small. They are in fact smaller than the micro and small offices, bringing FRS nearer to the small businesses for purposes of getting their returns and for purposes of even understanding that they exist, to know where they are and things like that. In terms of revenue collection, the Pareto law also applies. The big corporations pay the big tax. The small entities bring in the small trickles, but it all matters because we are all contributing to the Commonwealth. So the issue of the informal sector, one, deployment of technology, opening satellite offices, and the threshold reduction has also helped to address issues in that sector. My senior colleague can also complement what I have said.
But sorry, just before he says that, I just wanted to comment that that word that you use, trickles, some of us fall into that trickles category. So it didn't sit well with, when you said trickles, it's a lot of money. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You see, when you talk of the informal sector, in most cases you're dealing with individuals and enterprises, because FRS mandate is to collect for the big, limited liability companies and all that. So there's a very important body that we have, which we call the Joint Tax Board. I just saw the secretary this morning. The Joint Tax Board has the 36 states Internal Revenue Services and the FCT, and FRS chairing that, JTB body. And I'm a member of that JTB, body. They're actually working on what we call the presumptive tax regime. And it has gone to a certain level now because taxation is all about legislation, actually. So they're working on that to see how they can now bring them on board. And it will surprise probably the audience to hear that we're opening satellite offices. We've actually opened 27 this year. So somebody would want to say, okay, you are now leveraging on technology, how can you now be opening offices? The major essence of that is to get the tax authorities closer to them, so that in due course, we'll now migrate them to start the e-services. Yes, so for the informal sector, that we have great potentials there too, and we're working on that under the Joint Tax Board umbrella. Yes, so just to add to what my colleague has said.
Okay, question, I will rephrase it, but I think that it is born out of those big figures that you were talking about earlier on. And so this person is saying, does FIRS pay all this money to the federal government purse? And then the question doesn't end there. And it says,
thank you very much. I've had cause to respond to this kind of questions on different occasions, even informally when discussing with friends. They will be like, what's FRS, what's the Nigeria's budget? They put out the figures, and then as we've collected this, so why do we need to borrow? You see, FRS is the only agency saddled with that responsibility to collect on behalf. But they forget the fact that the Nigerian government has just a share of what is being collected, globally. And we also collect certain taxes on behalf of certain institutions. For instance, we collect what we call the education tax on behalf of the Tertiary Education Fund. And if you go to our Nigerian colleges of education and universities, you see TED Fund visible there. So if we collect education tax, that is not for the federal government, it's for TED Fund. We also collect what we call the NIGERIAN levy, Information Technology Development Agency. It is for that particular agency that will collect on their behalf. Even the VAT that we collect is being shared among the 2 tiers of government using a certain formula, because the federal government receives only, I think, about 15% of that. The 15, 35 and 15, 50 and 35%. So all those monies is not for the federal government alone. And don't forget, they share these monies on behalf of the 774 local governments and the 36 states of the federation. And they also have their own individual budgets. So it is not true to say these monies all belong to the federal government or is being shared and all that, because if you want to do that, it means you now have to add the federal government's budget vis-a-vis the state government's budget as well. But I'm happy to say that even the State Internal Revenue Services, we're really partnering now very well with them. They're also recording very impressive figures, yes, at the state levels also.
Okay, but I'm sure you can understand the apprehension and the queries that always go through our minds when we hear this
Yes.
trillion this, and then we're still borrowing.
Yeah.
So I believe that it was also an important question. So
Sure,
it allowed you to push
Yeah.
that information out. So and it's never too many times to answer
course,
that
sure,
question.
sure, yeah.
Right. I'd like to thank you once again for being part of this, and I would like to invite the convener so that we can take a group photograph. Yes, sir. Okay. So if we have you step forward, please. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Right. The presentation. Buddy. I'd like to invite Monsura to take charge of the presentation.
All right, thank you all once again. Thank you, Mr. Ola, for anchoring that first panel session. We'll all agree that conversations like this cannot be overemphasized, as they provide interesting insights into governance, as well as the role of the different institutions of government, which impact and also interface directly with the citizens and the country at large. It is important, therefore, that these engagements, which encourage dialogue between regulatory bodies and the citizenry, to be held both continually and regularly. So before we commence the next session, delving into how FIRS is leveraging technology for efficient revenue collection, I would like to once again specially recognize the presence of the Secretary Joint Tax Board in person of Mrs. Aisha Obomegye. Pardon me once again. She's representing the chairman of the Joint Tax Board, who is also the executive chairman of the FIRS. Thank you for coming. It's our pleasure to have you, ma'am. So permit me, therefore, to invite our panelists who would further drive today's conversation to discuss how the service leverages technology for efficient revenue collection. And to begin that, I would like to invite Alhaji Kabir, once again, Abba. Please join me on stage, the Coordinating Director, General Tax Operations Group. Thank you, sir. I'd also like to have Mr. Femi Olarinde, who's the Technical Assistant to the Executive Chairman, to join me for the next session. Thank you. And then lastly, I'd like to have Mr. Biliaminu Kofarbai, who will be giving us a brief presentation on the digital roadmap of the FIRS, who's also going to be part of the panel session. Thank you. So to start this panel session, we would have a brief presentation from Mr. Biliaminu. on the digital roadmap of the FIRS, and this would open the conversation for the afternoon. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I stand on the existing protocol. Glad to be here. Good afternoon, all. Like my group lead earlier said, it was not just out of the blue. It was actually a calculated efforts and a well-planned process that got us where we are, and we're still planning to move ahead. When the administration came in, they had to sit down to redesign the processes to see how it's going to be optimal. So we started in 2020, which you will see to the next end how we arrived at where we are and where we intend to be. Can I have the next slide, please? The next page, please. All right. Taxation starts basic on the pillars of registration. It's because registration will give you insight into the data, and you should know what the taxpayer is into and what they are into and what you are expected from them. So the management had to now reorganize the entire registration process without actually disrupting the process at the beginning. That to the extent taxpayers did not even realize this was actually happening. It was quietly done. They were now migrated to the new system gradually. That was where we started in the first quarter of 2020. Along the line, to get people more to buy into the new registration process, the TCC module was also introduced. So taxpayers did not realize what was happening, but they did fall into it because of the tax clearance they were getting from it, and it was moving smoothly. That was what we were able to achieve by the second quarter of 2020. Again, by that year, mid that year, we have achieved about 100,000 plus taxpayers on the system. And this was gradually moving. As we progressed to the second quarter, we had to now introduce the payment service providers, about 3 of them. They were all on the network. Before now, we introduced the VAT filing module. The VAT filing is a monthly filing exercise, which is very simple. So we had to introduce it, and that was what brought people to keep coming. And then the last one there, by end of fourth quarter of 2020, we have more taxpayers on board. Next slide, please. By 2021, we now start adjusting to the company income tax, to the real business of the day. So our collection in 2020 was not, but it's also encouraging. Now we're coming to 2021. In 2021, we deployed the CIT module by first quarter. By second quarter, we had a cut over, a big band. Everybody was thinking it was going to fail, but management were consistent and they know what their targets were. They kept sensitizing the taxpayers, encouraging them to go E, and that is how far we have gone. By the mid-year, we have achieved 50% online filing for company income tax, which is a success. Even the international organizations, the IMF, World Bank, actually recognize this as a milestone progress. By the third quarter, we now start enhancing, checking the wrongs we have done or we have gotten wrong along the line to perfect the system. And then we gone to fourth quarter, implementation of the changes that the taxpayers actually recall. Because this management, part of the thing is they are customer-centric. They actually listen to the customers' voices, the taxpayers' voices, aligning it with the law. So when we got those feedbacks, we had to realign all the processes. And then our achievements are there. So come to the next slide, please. Next slide, which is going to be 2022. By 2022, we have reconciled all the legacy records and deployed the CGT module, deployed the non-resident module also because we have non-resident taxpayers that we're dealing with. And by that mid-year, we have achieved 100% of our compliance records that we want to meet. So I will just jump here to the next slide, which is 2023, what we are currently doing. But I'll just also jump to the last slide, please. Next slide, which is the last. So you can see our plan, which we started in 2020. You can see our collection, which the group lead has actually pointed out was 5.5 trillion. systematic plan that management have done, and all hands are on deck. So this is the progression so far in our digital transformation process. There are other things. Due to time, I will not want to go into details, but I just wanted to give you the highlights and the processes taken, or the activities done by management to arrive at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Billy Aminu, for that. And I think it's a good opener for this conversation that we're about to have. So I'll start by saying that it's interesting that you've highlighted some of the possibilities and ways that technology is used to optimize the service or the delivery of operations of FIRS. But on the other hand, it is also important for us to discuss some of the potential challenges which may inhibit the success of such initiatives. And we would say that some of these are partly based on perhaps the perception and behavior of the citizenry on one hand, and even environmental factors. And so my first question will go to you, sir. What would you say are some of the potential challenges on one hand, and then on the other hand, some of the possible solutions for implementing new technology in any government agency, and particularly one that continuously and constantly interfaces with the people?
You see, thank you very much. You see, when we talk about technology, it entails a lot of things that if you're not in that sector, you may not be able to see it. When I first decided to deploy technology to its fullest, the major thing then was the infrastructure. How do you even build it? How do you even protect the taxpayers' data and information? And FRS is an organization with over 11, 12,000 staff. How do you even get to change their psyche to even, to accept that particular? So it was really a big challenge for us, if not for the resilience of the management and the team. I don't think we would have been there by now, but now it's a success story. So when the idea was conceived, of course, there were a lot of sensitization and stakeholder meetings to come to sit together to begin to do some pilot, testing, with some of our offices and some of our operations. And FRS decided not to take it full blown. The digital team was doing it module by module. I think we're in the 8th module now. And what is most interesting about FRS deployment of technology is that it was done in-house by our staff. Meaning to say we don't really spend much, because if you tend to deploy technology and spend so much on it, or you're dependent on some other party to provide the key things, I mean, you're not there. But for FRS, it was developed in-house. We're doing it in stages. We're training our staff. We're sensitizing all, the taxpayers and our tax consultants. It's not a success story. And it's a full bouquet. It's a full technology package. We're driving it gradually. There were a lot of challenges, even in-house. Our staff didn't even want to embrace it initially. With continuous sensitization, and when they now began to see the figures increasing day by day, of course, they had no option but to accept. And there was one major challenge that we faced. You see, starting from a manual to semi-manual, and you now want to fully automate. Of course, there's what we call the credit notes. If a taxpayer or a company does some kind of business, some taxes are being withheld, and he has a credit note which he can use to offset future taxes. So, to now take care of the pre-automated period, we have to now verify. And we were very careful as at that time, because it was a crossover period for us. So we now put a line there. Any credit note that is obtained before June 2020, we have to now put some levels of checks to make sure that we authenticate before we now upload. But after that period, it now comes up, automatically and seamless. And of course, the challenges were enormous, but we thank God we can really say we're there now. And more to come. I'll continue to say this. It's the way out for us. And that is what has done the magic, because it's the same taxpayers, it's the same economy, it's the same system. But to add 4 trillion naira to it, there's something there.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And thank you, actually, a round of applause for that. So before I move to Mr. Femi for my next question, I'd like you to further deep dive into So there's been conversations around your internal stakeholders, but how well does this drive into the public, the citizens that you want, the taxpayers who you want to use this new technology, this innovations? What kind of interfaces, what kind of engagements were you able to hold to ensure their buy-in?
Good. You see, when we started, like I told you, we started, little by little, having to get the major. For instance, in the tax parlance, there's what we call the Big Four. That is the big firm, consulting firms, the Big Four. We have to now start with them because they provide more than 70 to 80% of the taxes that we collect. So we now started with them. And of course, there was some recruitment that was done of these young Nigerians that have this passion for it. So we now put them all together to begin to sensitize them. And we have over 180 thereabout tax offices scattered around the country. So we ensured that we posted to each office a tax pro max expert that I can call, so that they're now the first level of escalation of whatever issue. And we now open what we call the help desk in every single office. So if a taxpayer comes, in fact, at some point, we're even assisting them, to embrace and even use that particular technology. If you cannot do it, we encourage you to come to the office. Our staff will put you through. And if you have any challenge, of course, that Tax Pro Max champion, we call them, in every office, will now sensitize you and put you on board. If it is beyond him, we will have what we call the regional offices, down the line up to the headquarters. And of course, at some point, we used to kind of halt and come together because it's a human thing. Let me put it that way. So where we have experienced challenges, we now sit together at the management level, especially those in operations and those in the digital support group, to now say we have not experienced this, going by our tax laws also, to now say this is not really okay with us. We'll now sit down together, retweak it, come up with it, sensitize again. Just last week, just a few days ago, we had so many sessions with our taxpayer when we developed this new VAT filing model. Yeah. Yes, because we now realize that we're losing so much. People make fictitious claims of impute VAT. So we're having a lot of sensitization to our taxpayers and consultants. It was rough initially, but I think Nigerians have now seen it. And everybody is now on board the Tax Pro Max, both consultants and the taxpayers, and the tax officers as well.
That's interesting, and thank you very much for that. So I would build on my next question for Mr. Femi for this, and it is that in any given society, and in Nigeria in particular, your entities, the individuals, the taxpayers, they cut across various strata. Now, if we're talking about, still leveraging on technology perhaps, if we're talking about fairness and equity, what would you say are the ways that FIRS is able to address these concerns of fairness and equity within the Nigerian tax system?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. When we started this session, especially the first one, when my boss spoke, I was thinking maybe there was nothing else to say. And he kind of summarized most of the things we've been doing. Now, when you talk about fairness and equity, it's a very germane principle of taxation. Of course, there should be fair in the way you administer taxes and also very equitable. And when we look at that, that means, like you said, it has to cut across the stratas of the society. Taxation, like they say, is law. So you cannot collect taxes except there's a law to back it up. Now, the laws also provides you the basis to which you will administer those taxes, how you go about. Now, the law itself, you start the issue of the fairness and equity right from the way the laws have been drafted and the way the laws have been brought together. So that is why when laws are being drafted, almost every aspect of the society are always available. Those that develop the laws are National Assembly, and of course, they represent every strata of the society. Let's talk about the House of Representatives, who have people representing all the constituencies in Nigeria. So definitely, they consider that. Now, let's come to administration. Alhaji Kabir Abba spoke about we even trying to create smaller offices in some areas, and why? To reach those people, even at the grassroots. Now, you say, what is FIS role, even at the grassroots? We have exempted businesses that has up to 25 million and below. So what are we doing? We have also said, don't pay VAT if your turnover for a year is 25 million. But we believe that there's still a role of tax education. And also, in Nigeria, a lot of people don't know who is the local government tax committee, or who sometimes the first name they see is the FIRS, and they see Nigeria Tax Authority. It is the person collecting taxes for Nigeria. So we need to also provide an avenue to be able to speak to them in order to build that tax-paying culture. And the principle of equity, we are not saying no, because we collect from the large tax, we should just neglect the small tax. When they grow, they will not, if they don't have that culture, they will not be able to imbibe that. And so when you look at our also digitization, he has also spoken about what we call the self-service centers. The self-service center is because we recognize that not every business is as buoyant as the other one. Some will even tell you, I don't have money to buy data. And you say, I should go online and file my returns. Yeah. Some even tell you, I don't have computers. So what did we do? We created what we call the self-service centers in our offices so that you could get in there, even if you say, I am not digitally savvy enough to use a computer. You have somebody dedicated who will help you do that to ensure that you fulfill your obligation. So we are very, very intentional about our deployment. We are very intentional about all our reforms. And to that extent, we've been seeing results. You can see a leap from 6.4 to 10.1 trillion. It's a very big leap, which has not happened in the... I'm not sure there's any revenue agency that's been able to, or anybody who collects revenue that's been able to do that leap. It's just because we had an intentional plan, and we continue to work and develop on that. And while we are doing that, we give it the human face. The human face is that you've spoken about equity. We consider everyone in the chain. And that is, I believe that's addressed your
Absolutely,
question.
absolutely, very much, and thank you for that. So I'll come back to Mr. Bliamino. You had given some overview of, how your how FIRS is using technology to optimize its operations. But I'd also like you to touch a little bit on if there's a specific, or if there are specific case studies, just so people can connect these initiatives, innovations with how exactly FIRS is conducting its operations. If there's any case study on this digital technology, please share one or two with us.
Well, it's actually a kind of vague question, but I will try to give it flesh to the best of my ability.
Okay.
You see, we do with corporate bodies. So basically our target are corporate entities. But with regards to individuals or anywhere there is VAT element, we also try to key in. So like now during the automation processes, there are people or organizations that have huge data, and it makes it difficult for them to file, like the banks, big stores, So what we have done in our own end to make it easy for them, we have enabled a machine-to-machine communication, whereby they don't need to be going to our system to do all the manual entering of the data. Our machine-to-machine will sweep the data to our machine, and all they need is to log in to confirm the book balances if they're okay with it and click confirm. So it's like a swift way of filing. And then with regards to the small taxpayers also, part of the benefits, the case study that we see as a benefit to them, which they actually like, is what was introduced this year, January. Maybe you didn't notice it in the slide I presented earlier, the one-click GCC. I think it's first of its kind, whereby a taxpayer, like my boss rightly said, can just sit from here and generate its tax clearance without having to go to anybody. Before now, the culture has been difficult. People have to go and apply in the tax office, wait for weeks, and then it depends on the body language of whoever is sitting to see when to give you or the processes to take. I remember when I was a copper, sometimes back, I wouldn't say, I went to one of the tax offices to obtain a tax clearance, not tax clearance, TIN, because I wanted to
I wanted to start, I was planning then how to build my house right from when I was a copper, so I was going to do mortgage. So when I went to the mortgage house, they said I have to have a TIN. At that time, FRS was handling TIN for individuals because then FCTRS was not established. I went to one of the offices in Abuja. It was difficult for me to get the TIN. It was difficult. So right now, all this have been made easy. Yeah, the TIN comes out in your certification, and if you want to do your certificate from CAC, and if you want to do even registration, it's something we are meeting by this the end of this quarter, whereby you can also sit down from the comfort of your home and conclude your registration without having to visit our office. So that's seamless integration with other agencies that enabled taxpayers to be able to do what they're supposed to do in the tax office. It's actually a winning case for the taxpayers, and they love the story because they don't have to waste their time, especially for consultants who are in Lagos. Some of them have one person in Agege, another person in Island, another person in Lake. So it's difficult for them to shuttle. But right now, from the comfort of their home, they can sit down, or offices, they can sit down and file and pay and do everything that they want to do. So the cases vary from taxpayer to taxpayer, but everybody has one or two success stories to say.
Thank you very much for that. And so you've touched a lot on why it is important for us to digitize, and also the role of technology in collecting, in administrating, and managing our taxpayers, how they contribute. But I'd also like you to touch on, still on you, Mr. Biliaminu, are there any opportunities that you see for further investments in technology to do two things? One, improve revenue collection, and then secondly, to reduce costs.
Automation has a lot of advantages. A lot that you cannot even quantify, because every day you move from the position you are to the next, you see another horizon. That is how it progresses. But with regards to taxation, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Like Mr. Femi rightly said, everything is about the law. We don't invent the law as a service. Everything is what has been handed over to us from the law that we will now administer. So if the law will provide more data sharing between organizations properly, and then the issue of, if you go to other countries, what happens in other countries when it comes to the issue of taxation, there is no privacy to that. But then the tax officials are also sworn to oath to defend or to protect your privacy with regards to all those things. So that has to be looked around there. So the potential that is out there with regards to what we can collect is enormous. So if these things can be harnessed in the law to allow that data sharing properly, you will, I think, will be good for it as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll come back to you, Alhaji Kabir. Oftentimes, we've been having these ongoing conversations on how taxpayers, should participate actively. But it's also important to then know, from the point of view of the FRS, how exactly is transparency and accountability of the service promoted?
Thank you very much. I think I'll start from this point. Last year, we signed a charter with Servicom, that service compact with all Nigerians. By signing that charter, it means we have stated and lined out what we want to do to the taxpaying public. And just some couple of weeks ago, they took an assessment of this charter that we signed into law. In their 5-star rating, they rated FRS with a 4-star. And amongst the criteria there's transparency, there's fairness, there's this, there's that. And you see, in FRS, and going by the laws that we have, we just don't slam it on you. Because what the law says, we give you an assessment. If you don't come to do your full disclosure, we send you a letter. We send our staff. We call you. We give you all the treatment, all in the spirit of transparency, for you to come and perform your civic responsibility. If you don't do it, that is when we now have stages of getting to recover whatever taxes there is there. And the way the Nigerian tax system is even structured, if you give a taxpayer an assessment, be it an audit or back duty or whatever it is, he still has that leverage within a month to either object to it, and he comes to sit down to do some reconciliations. And even at that, if it doesn't end there, that is why we have what we call the tax appeal tribunals. all in the spirit of transparency and fairness. So you can go and escalate your cases or your issues, and of course there will be an arbiter to come and, resolve whatever issue that is there. FRS has been very, very transparent, and this can be testified even from our taxpayers, because at every fora, we make it open. How can you come to even help us to do it better for you? If you have any challenge, come to us. This contact service center that I told you about, it runs 24 hours in different languages. And I can assure you, FRS staff have been trained now to be the professionals that they are. We've gone a lot of courses. And we have also gone to, understudy some revenue authorities even within the African continent to see how they do it. We're always trying to improve. So FRS is very transparent in whatever thing that we do. All our books are there. The taxpayers are free to work in any of our offices or to even call us at any point in time. As I speak to you now, if a call comes in here, if it's a taxpayer, I'll have to excuse you and answer him to address his concerns. So that is where we have gone to.
That is interesting.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that. Before I move to my final question for the panelists, if you have any questions, do well to send them forward so we can ask them. There are sheets of paper going around. It's fine. Sheets of paper going around. I'll be happy to ask your questions on behalf of you. Thank you. All right, thank you. There's a few questions here, so please keep sending them forward. Thank you. My last question will go to you, Mr. Femi. It's easy. There's always two sides to a coin, as we say, right? While we want the regulatory bodies on one hand to be accountable, to be transparent, to show us how they are working, and also to communicate how these things impact us and influence the citizens. This is G2C, right? Government to the citizens. What would you say some of the roles of the citizens are in ensuring that the job of FIRS is maximized fully to their own benefits? So what sort of things are we expected of the citizens as taxpayers to ensure that, FIRS is doing its job as it should be doing and is impacting your lives?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is quite simple a question. What do we expect taxpayers to do to ensure we continue to serve them better? First is for them to continue to fulfill their obligations under the excise tax laws. And what are those obligations? To pay their taxes as prompt as it's stated under the law, to file their returns where even when you don't have taxes to pay, because that's what the law says. Oftentimes we get taxpayers say, they just call you and say, I need a tax clearance certificate, but you know what? I've not been doing business for the past 3 years. The company has just been there. And I tell them, the first thing is that the law does not say, how do you want me as a taxman to know you've not been doing business? I don't know whether you have or not. So there's also, as we are asking for transparency, and we also asking, the tax authority is also asking the taxpayer, can you communicate too? Yeah, we talk about continuous education, because every time, I am sure in this room, if you ask taxpayers about some of our reforms, they will say, we don't know. So at every point in time, we always see a person who is new in the room. So we have always been doing what we call continuous taxpayer education. We have the taxpayer service department who is championing that. We also have a communication department who also brings out different media distance, so that taxpayer will know what to do. We also have the tax policy department when it comes to technical issues that you feel, even when you are very sure, but you believe that you don't want to run foul of the law, you get the direct interpretation of the tax law as prescribed, as what FIRS is saying about it. So we ask that taxpayers continue to fulfill their obligation, and the least of it is filing of their returns. Taxes are there. Many people have said, we don't know. I remember before this administration, a tax like the stamp duties was not really known by many people. In fact, we were taught in school that stamp duties are not compulsory. But also the same people that told us that tax is a compulsory levy. Yeah. So what's the correlation? But what we need to know is that every taxes are compulsory to be paid. Where you do not have the obligation to pay a tax, there will be an obligation to file a returns. And so our taxpayers should be well abreast of the information, also seek knowledge, because when it is needed, we see that a lot of people do feasibility study when they want to start businesses, but when it's time to pay tax, they say, oh, we don't know. So we expect that, please seek knowledge. And in seeking knowledge, you fulfill your obligation as it is provided for by the extant laws. Thank you.
Okay, just to add on that, so that there is emphasis on the two-way communication. As we communicate to you, also communicate to us. Give us back in all ways, and then we would build upon that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Once again. I will move straight to the questions from the audience, and I'll start with Mr. Biliamino. Whenever we talk about technology, there are always downsides, and one big one is internet penetration, right? What the impact of that would be downtimes for networks. So the question here says that since the Tax Pro Max software has been introduced, there have been experiences of network challenges. So specifically, what efforts is FIRS making to reduce or eliminate this totally?
Let me start. May God help me. We have done our best to have 247, but like the environment we are, there are a lot of factors to that. Management has done its best to make sure that the infrastructures are stable. We had to move to the cloud to make sure we are stabilized. So with regards to availability, we're doing our best, but still along the line, you might have one or two things. Just on my way here, I got a call from our service provider, I wouldn't say. They said they just have a glitch. They're having a downtime, so as we speak, so that nobody will, that was I say, may God help me. But they assured me it's going to take less than 15 minutes and they will restore it. So this happens everywhere around the world, you understand? The downtime, they will tell you we have 99% availability. That dot or the 1% is to accommodate this kind of issues that might arise. You might look at it this way, like my coordinating director, Kabir rightly said, we did this in-house. So you can imagine the tedious work that went under and the man-hour that was consumed and for us to come this far. So along the line, we are still having some teething problems, you understand, that we are still chewing. And as it goes by, he also said something to you that last week we had a forum with a lot of taxpayers to get their feedback to see which button did we not make well, or what are we supposed to correct. So long as it's
recording
within the
in progress,
we will implement it. So with regards to downtime, honestly speaking, we are doing our best to see that this has not really affected the business. And in no distance time, I believe if we have fully migrated to the cloud 100%, I don't think we will experience that kind of downtime, especially if there's a national, only if there's a national issue. Yeah.
Thank you for that. There's a couple of questions that are touching on both the GIF MIS or GIF-MIS and how that is how it integrates with the Tax Pro Max. So this question says that taxpayers have found it difficult to obtain their withholding tax credit notes from payments via the GIF MIS system, and they'd like to know what FIRS is doing. Again, as there's a lot of emphasis on the Tax Pro Max, so how are we integrating this to make it easy for them, especially with the WHT credit notes?
Okay, before now, the taxpayers know that before you get your credit note, it takes a while for you to do that. And like the coordinating director, Oga Kabira, rightly said earlier that we had a cut-over period. Now, there are people come to claim credit note of 2009, 2007, 2011, 13, 14. Now, this is all before the digital roadmap. So it's a challenge, but we still say, okay, you still are entitled to that. We will go over the record, so to go and get it. Now, there's a challenge that we are having with the GIF-MIS process. Right now, you get your withholding. If the payment is made right away, you get your withholding credit right away.
Yep.
So the cases are not going forward at the records from before now. Now, and the records before now, the challenges we have, there is a standard process on the GIFMI system. So any of the MDAs that follow the standard process on the GIFMI process, that payment advice comes to our system, even our legacy system, where we can pick and issue withholding credit note without any problem. But if the people from the MDA do not use those processes, the standard procedure, the money will go straight to the CBN account without advice to FIRS. So that is the gap. So we need to manually get an office to go to the records in CBN, you understand, to get it out. And another way to do, one of the payment service provider is responsible for this money swift. So we say, okay, it's now difficult and cumbersome because of the records to go to CBN and do this because of these taxpayers. What do? Now FIRS with the payment service provider improvise. You can go back to the MDA that did process your payment and let them requery it and issue and requery it using the right process. It will update and the notification will come to us. So the gap there is just that the notification does not come to us, so it's a difficult thing for us to trace the money to CBN, but we are still doing it. And right now, the gap has been closed because like we said, these are records of yesteryears, not today.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. So, to wrap up the session, I'll take two more questions. One to Mr. Femi. So this is, you talked about fairness, equity, and then of course we touched on inclusion as well. And you also made an interesting comment on constantly having newcomers in the room. So this question says that, are there specific plans to digitally identify these newcomers in the room, new taxpayers, and how to ease their transition into the digitization process?
Thank you very much. If the person had followed well, even Biliamino has spoken about our next phase is a registration model that allows you to register from wherever you are. So a new taxpayers can easily register themselves and immediately they get their tax identification number. Aside from that, we've also spoken about our collaboration with the CAC, the Corporate Affairs Commission. And as you're registering your business, as the life of the business is starting, you are being Christian, just like you have a new baby and the naming ceremony is done. And it's done right from where it is being bettered, which is the Corporate Affairs Commission. So all this identification. And looking at, let's talk about maybe looking at unique identification too. We've spoken about we having collaborations from the Joint Tax Board to the NIMC, to the CBN, to the NCC, to ensure that all the data that are available across can be synced with the tax identification number and to have a unifier, a common unifier to ensure that everyone can be identified, whether you're a business or a natural or an artificial person. So when it comes about identification, we seal up the registration aspect of it, whether individual, and that we promote good tax administration in Nigeria.
Thank you very much for that. So on a final note, I'll bring it back to Alhaji Kabir. We've spoken about digitization, and this is also leveraging technology for tax administration. I'd like to say, just building on feedback as well, interfaces like this, engagements like this, conversations like this should continue, but what other additional ways would you say that the citizens or the taxpayers should engage with FIRS from any comfort of wherever they are?
Thank you very much. There are the rights and obligations of a taxpayer. There is what we as a service are expected to give to the taxpayers, and on their own part also we need those feedbacks. You see, we have tried our best. We have Twitter handles, we have Instagram pages, we also expect these feedbacks from the taxpayers. And the way it is now, there's hardly anything you can do without coming to the FIRS, so to say, because you cannot open a bank account if you don't have a TIN. Yep. And FIRS is the only agency that can give you a TIN. There are certain things that are tied to the service. So I want to call on taxpayers, whatever it is that they see, let them be curious to come and ask and even advise us on how to even improve. So there are rights and obligations of a taxpayer. We expect these feedbacks, and FRS is done in the open. That is to say, we're conspicuously, in all the major towns and even crannies of the country. Yes, so that is one way. And secondly, because because you pay VAT, for instance, on a monthly basis. And like my colleague said, even if you don't have any taxes to pay, the law mandates you to even come and file. Because the fact that they say that if you're below 25 million naira, you don't pay taxes, but the law says you should file. So what I'm trying to say is that as a Nigerian adult, you cannot say you don't know FRS or you don't have anything to do with the FRS. Because our revenues are no longer sustainable anywhere in the world. We have to come back to these non-oil revenues. And I want to call on Nigerians. There is no hiding place now. Everybody must pay his or her taxes as at when due. Because the system is so robust now that we can just get you. Because we still have people that are not in the tax net. We have developed technology that we have plugged into different, sources of information and where we can get, no taxpayers that are not on board. So it is better now, before we get there, because we still have some way to go, I know, it's better. I want to call on Nigerians, if you have any questions, but even though we still do our engagement and enlightenment, both at the national, at the state levels, at the micro and small tax offices and all that. So they can reach out to us at any point in time. Yes.
Thank you very much for that. May we give them a round of applause for this wonderful session. And again, it speaks to why it is important to continuously hold these conversations. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you. Please remain on stage as I invite the convener to take pictures with us. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, my brother. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Please put your hands together for the panelists again. To represent the chairman here today, I'm calling on the Secretary of the Joint Tax Board, Mrs. Ajia Nana Aisha Obomeki. Pardon me if that's not the right pronunciation. Please come. Please put your hands together for her until she's here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So I've got only one question for you.
Okay.
There were two. I brought it down to one.
Okay.
Tax is like a two-way communication. The taxpayers pay, the collectors receive, right? So, what can you do? What are you going to do differently to make sure, as FRS, to make sure that you attain more? And what do you think that the citizens should do so that you can attain that 20 trillion and 30 trillion targets? What can you do?
Thank you very much for that brilliant questions. It's born out of the passion we all have for our country because we are borrowing and we need revenue to development and stop borrowing. What we would do differently to make people to be responsible to their role of paying taxes is that we should all remember that we are citizens of this great nation called Nigeria, and we have sworn to be patriotic and good citizens in order to build a nation that we all dream of. To be a good citizen, we have to obey the Constitution. I remember that Section 24 of the Nigerian Constitution says that
It is the responsibility of every citizen in this country to file and pay the correct taxes. And it is when this money is paid, we should realize that we're able to carry out infrastructural development and provide social amenities. And if this tax you pay creates a nexus in the social contract, a social contract of you pay taxes and I provide amenities for you. Though it's not a recruiter relationship, that is, if I pay 500 naira tax, I should expect services equivalent to 500 naira. It's not recruiter. It's a compulsory payment that we are supposed to pay. So, since it's a compulsory payment, like Selidion says, tax is like rain. If it doesn't rain this month, some months to come it's going to rain. So why don't we get ourselves acquainted with the law or the operation of the tax? Because if we don't do it today, we'll do it tomorrow. There's no running away from it. And everybody is becoming on the table more and more as we engage in data mining. So the citizens should try and acquaint themselves with their rights and obligations so that they know certain rights that they are not enjoying and certain obligations they are supposed to deliver on their part. So many avenues have been created to make the tax compliance easy for the citizens. And also, as the chairman of the Joint Tax Board, I'm speaking on behalf of the chairman of the Joint Tax Board, though I'm the secretary, it is the function of the Joint Tax Board to create uniformity in the application of tax in Nigeria, in the application of the tax law at the subnational level, and also to ensure that the incidence of taxation is managed, and also there's efficiency in the tax administration in Nigeria. All the mandates is geared towards making the citizens less burdened with the tax they are paying. And the citizens should also make inquiry on how their money is being utilized. If you see that your tax money is creating the necessary infrastructure, you'll be encouraged to pay more and the compliance will be easy. Last we have today, we have about 35% of the taxable adult in the tax net in Nigeria today. We want to increase that level to 90% and even 70%. If we are able to get more taxpayers in the net, then we'll be able to hit the 20 trillion and the 30 trillion. One of the initiatives in the pipeline, I must use this avenue to inform the general public, is that we are coming up with a presumptive tax to be signed into law by the minister. With that, everybody in this country, no matter what, we have to pay something. Because it is when you contribute to a purse that you are interested in what happens to that purse. Many people in the informal sector have not really been contributing, or they've been contributing to the wrong purses. But if the automation we are engaging under the Data for Tax initiative comes on board, the presumptive tax is implemented, and even the World Bank is going to support us on that, I think we should be able to get to where we want to go and get the needed revenue to develop this country. Thank you very much.
Though I promised you it was going to be one question, but you're forcing a second one. I take a look at the figures you have. 5 trillion averagely in 2020. 2021 you had 7. In 22 you had 10.1, I remember. Is 20 trillion attainable in the next 1 year? Yes, no, and a few words.
Yes, it's attainable. There are many initiatives underway, some that I cannot really disclose here, and but all of them centers around data automation. So with this data automation, mining, and intelligence, 20 trillion is possible.
All right.
I really have to stop just to keep my time low. I need to hand over to Ola Ogunlanu. Can you please put your hands together for Ajia? Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Ajia, thank you very much. And of course, I'm sure you can guess that is that presumptive tax that is very presumptive. But the beauty of it is that indeed, when you put your money into the purse, then you are concerned intentionally about what is happening with your money, so that we don't keep falling into that. And what is government doing with our money when you're not putting 1 naira in it? At this time, I'd like to say a big thank you for everyone that has been part of this. We have just one more item on the agenda, and that item happens to be lunch and networking. So I would really appreciate if everyone joins us on that last item. But the way it would work is that we'd ask you to please remain seated. We're having lunch outside of this hall, and sorry about that. So basically, we're going to invite you to lunch, and that's why I'm asking that you please sit, and the ushers would come beside you. They will probably have to tap you, but then it means that please come with me for lunch. We will appreciate if you join us for lunch, so that we would be certain that you participated from the beginning to the end. Once again, we'd like to thank you on behalf of FIRS and G2C for being a part of this amazing intervention, and something that we truly need to encourage and continue in our great country, Nigeria. May I ask, before the ladies take us for lunch, that we please rise for the national anthem.